A widening political confrontation has erupted in Washington as lawmakers intensify pressure on the Pentagon, and at the center of the fight is the U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. The battle is not about budgets or routine oversight, but about a single piece of unreleased evidence: the unedited video of a controversial U.S. strike on a suspected Venezuelan narco-terrorist vessel. Congress has issued what amounts to a direct ultimatum to the Pentagon. Either the full footage is handed over, or a quarter of the Secretary's travel budget will be cut. What began as a dispute over a military operation has now evolved into a dispute over transparency, accountability, and the limits of executive power in wartime decision-making. The incident at the center of this confrontation occurred on September 2 during a U.S. operation in the Caribbean. The Pentagon says the target was a suspected narco-terrorist boat linked to Venezuelan criminal networks. The strike was part of a broader effort under U.S. Southern Command to disrupt trafficking routes and dismantle armed groups the United States categorizes as transnational terrorist threats. But controversy grew sharply when details emerged of a second strike, one that hit survivors who had lived through the initial attack. That second strike raised immediate questions among lawmakers. Was it justified? Did the survivors pose a threat? Were they incapacitated? And who exactly gave the order? According to information presented to Congress, Admiral Frank Bradley was the officer who authorized the second strike. Secretary Hegseth later defended him, even while acknowledging he had not personally watched the entire operation live. When asked publicly about it, Hegseth declined to commit to immediate disclosure, saying, "We are reviewing that right now." He said this as lawmakers' demands were growing louder and patience in both chambers was running thin. The push for transparency escalated when Admiral Bradley was called to Capitol Hill to brief lawmakers directly. He brought video clips of the operation and walked through the timeline of events. The partial footage, rather than calming tensions, deepened the divide. Some members of Congress argued the images raised significant ethical and legal concerns. Others claimed the footage vindicated the Pentagon's initial assessments. With both sides drawing opposite conclusions from the same material, lawmakers insisted that only the full, unedited video would resolve the dispute. Behind closed doors, Democratic lawmakers voiced the strongest criticism. Several questioned whether proper rules of engagement were followed, especially in relation to the survivors targeted in the second strike. One senior senator was especially blunt in her criticism of the secretary, accusing him of overseeing operations that she described as unlawful. During the public fallout, one Democratic senator went so far as to label Hegseth a war criminal and called for his immediate removal. The accusation electrified the debate, further raising the political stakes around the footage. Republicans largely defended the Pentagon. Many argued that the operation was lawful, that the individuals targeted were part of a violent trafficking network, and that the footage shown to Congress confirmed the military's assessment. Some described the criticism as politically motivated, designed to undermine the broader anti-narcotics campaign underway in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. They also argued that sudden transparency demands could jeopardize operational security. The White House attempted to strike a middle course. President Donald Trump initially signaled he had no objection to releasing the footage. Later, however, he appeared content to defer the decision to the Defense Department, telling reporters that whatever Hegseth decides, it's okay for me. That statement effectively repositioned responsibility back onto the Pentagon, and it reinforced Congress's insistence that it would now use its own leverage to obtain the material. That leverage came in the form of the Pentagon's funding bill. Tucked within the legislation was a targeted provision aimed squarely at Hegseth's office. If the Defense Department does not turn over the unedited footage of all strikes conducted under Southern Command against designated terrorist or narco-terrorist groups, then 25% of the Secretary's travel budget will be withheld. The bill also requires a comprehensive lessons learned report on the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine before the full budget is restored. Lawmakers say the conditions are designed to strengthen oversight and ensure the Pentagon does not operate outside the boundaries set by Congress. The decision to condition part of a cabinet official's travel budget on compliance with transparency requirements is unusual. It signals a rare willingness by Congress to assert direct leverage over the Defense Department's top civilian leader. For some lawmakers, this approach reflects a belief that normal channels of oversight have stalled. For others, it reflects frustration with the Pentagon's unwillingness to commit to a full release of the video. While the political arguments play out in Washington, the human cost of these operations is also under scrutiny. In the past year, the United States has carried out more than 20 strikes in the Caribbean, targeting vessels it identifies as part of narco-trafficking networks. Independent reports suggest at least 80 people have been killed in these operations. Pentagon officials argue that the individuals involved are part of violent, heavily armed smuggling organizations that routinely engage in armed confrontations. Critics argue that lethal force has been deployed too readily, often with limited evidence and questionable adherence to international maritime law. Admiral Bradley was pressed intensely on these issues during his appearance before lawmakers. Some asked whether the survivors of the September 2 strike posed an immediate threat. According to accounts of the briefing, Bradley stated that no explicit kill order was issued, but maintained that the second strike fell within authorized rules of engagement. He defended the operation as tactically and legally sound. Although he did not offer every detail publicly, he insisted that his decisions were rooted in established military protocol. Following his briefing, reactions in Congress quickly split along party lines. A number of Republicans argued that the footage showed no misconduct, describing the survivors as still active and attempting to manipulate their capsized vessel. Some Democrats countered that the individuals appeared incapacitated or unable to resist. They questioned whether lethal force was justified at that stage and demanded to know why no attempts were made to assess, surrender, or render aid. The unanswered questions are central to why the footage matters. Lawmakers say the unedited video is essential to determining the legality of the second strike. Military experts note that even wartime rules make distinctions between active combatants and those who are no longer capable of fighting, including shipwrecked individuals. That distinction, they argue, may determine whether the operation was within the bounds of U.S. and international law. Meanwhile, the Pentagon has remained firm in its position. Officials have repeatedly stated that the operation was lawful and that the footage Congress has already seen supports that conclusion. Yet they continue to avoid committing to releasing the full version. Secretary Hegseth has publicly supported Admiral Bradley, stating that it was well within the authorities of Admiral Bradley to order the second strike. That statement has become a focal point in the debate, cited by both supporters and critics. Supporters say it affirms a proper chain of command. Critics say it underscores why oversight is necessary. As the controversy grows, pressure continues to mount on the Defense Department. Multiple committees are now involved, and congressional leaders from both parties have stated that they expect full compliance with the requirements outlined in the funding bill. While the bill is expected to pass both chambers, the question remains whether its enforcement will result in the actual release of the footage or simply deepen the standoff between the Pentagon and Congress. The broader public, watching the unfolding dispute, is left grappling with difficult questions about transparency and the use of force. Military operations against non-state actors are often conducted far from public view. Yet they involve decisions that can result in significant loss of life, and they shape U.S. foreign and security policy in powerful ways. The secrecy surrounding such operations has long been a topic of debate. This incident has ignited the issue on a national scale. The controversy also intersects with broader strategic tensions across Latin America. The United States has increased its maritime operations in the region in recent years, citing the threat posed by transnational criminal organizations. Washington argues that Venezuela's deteriorating political and economic landscape has allowed criminal networks to thrive, particularly in coastal areas. Critics counter that U.S. operations risk escalating tensions with Caracas and creating humanitarian and diplomatic fallout. Inside the Pentagon, officials emphasize that counter-narcotics operations are a core part of U.S. security policy. They argue that traffickers are often armed and dangerous, and that ignoring their activities would allow criminal networks to expand further. But critics warn that aggressive strikes can undermine public trust and even violate international law if they do not adhere to strict oversight. With the Pentagon bracing for the passage of the defense bill, the central question remains unresolved. Will the full footage ever be released? Members of Congress insist on access, arguing that without it, meaningful oversight is impossible. The Defense Department remains cautious, warning of potential security implications and insisting that existing procedures were followed. Secretary Hegseth, whose leadership is now the subject of intense scrutiny, is navigating an increasingly volatile political landscape. The accusation labeling him a war criminal, though rejected by Republicans and dismissed by the Pentagon, reflects how charged the debate has become. In Congress, the response has shifted from criticism to structural leverage, and the travel budget restriction symbolizes a broader message. Lawmakers want visibility into military operations, and they are willing to enforce consequences if that visibility is denied. President Trump's position adds another layer of complexity. By stating that he would defer to Hegseth's judgment, he has effectively allowed the Pentagon to control the response. Supporters say this reflects respect for military leadership. Critics say it allows the Defense Department to avoid accountability at a time when independent oversight is needed most. As the political and military fallout continues, one thing is clear: this issue is unlikely to fade quickly. The questions raised by the September 2 operation reach far beyond the immediate dispute. They touch on how the United States conducts targeted strikes, how it defines combatants in maritime operations, how it investigates potential misconduct, and how Congress ensures oversight over actions that take place out of public view. Whether the full footage will ultimately be released remains uncertain, but the demands for transparency, the criticism of the Pentagon's handling of the incident, and the rare use of budgetary pressure against a cabinet secretary all signal that this confrontation has already reshaped the debate over U.S. military operations in the Caribbean and will likely influence how such operations are viewed and conducted in the future.